Hi again. Another book in the military aviation series. This time it focuses on the Rhodesian Bush War, and it was written by a Rhodesian Air Force officer, Peter Bowyer, who flew most of the types of aircraft in the Rhodesian Air Force, either in training or operationally, and then did a lot of operations with the helicopter squadrons, the Alouette 3. The reason that the Rhodesians preferred the French Alouette was because Rhodesia is sometimes in excess of 4,000 feet above sea level. It needed a heli that was suitable for hot and high operations, because obviously the air is thinner and it affects payload and that kind of thing. So the alley was highly suitable for this, as it worked out. And it would take a crew of a pilot, a door gunner, and a stick of 4 troopies, soldiers. So it was ideal for what became the Fire Force role. And then another version was fitted with the French Matra 20mm cannon, which was called a K-car, and it was used in an attack role. So, as I say, the author flew most of the types, excuse me, with the exclusion of the Canberra, which was strange because one of his relatives had actually designed the aircraft. And the Canberra was the mainstay of the Rhodesian Air Force strike potential. It could strike deeply into many of the neighbouring countries and deliver bombing attacks. So some of the things that the author did working with the helicopters was developing visual tracking from the air. So either using slow fixed-wing aircraft or helicopters. And also they did experiments where they allowed a dog to follow a track, and it was followed by an aircraft with a handler in radio contact with the dog, giving commands to the dog to stop and so on. And the dog could track very, very quickly. Whereas visual tracking by a tracker team was a much slower process. So once somebody had been able to point out tracks from the air, the pilots and observers got very, very adept at following spoor through the bush without a tracking team. So that was one of the experiments that he was involved in. But he was also involved in the development of weapons for, excuse me, for the Air Force. One of the problems was when the Rhodesian Air Force was carrying out camp attacks, generally into the neighbouring countries against the terrorist camps and bases, the existing bomb loads would tend to bury themselves into the soft earth, very soft, dry ground in the African heat. And then the effect would be greatly reduced by the burying into the ground. And the standard bomb was a 250-pound bomb, which had been developed for World War II. And they came up against a problem which is very, very common in military and law enforcement, is that the senior officers are living in the past. They're still thinking about the procedures and tactics and equipment used when they were operational. And they received wisdom. Well, it won World War II for us, so the 250-pound bomb is certainly adequate. Anyway, what the author did was develop a series of weapons, and one of which was highly effective, was called the Alpha bomb. And this was a spherical bomb with a double skin. The inner dense sphere was explosive and fragmentation, and then there was an outer sphere, and in between the two spheres were a multitude of rubber balls made out of super rubber. And the idea was that the bomb was dropped, it would bounce. When it hit the ground, there was a two-stage switch, and the first impact would arm the switch, and the bomb would bounce to just overhead high, whereupon the delay would trigger the second switch. And therefore the blast and the frag would be dissipated over a wide area rather than being buried in the ground. And this revolutionized the attacks on the camps. They developed other weapons, the Bravo, and the golf bomb. The golf bomb was similar idea, had a probe. So the first thing that hit was this long probe, and the body of the bomb was still sticking outside of the ground. The probe would initiate the explosion. And then he also developed a flechette weapon, very, very simply, just using common building nails. And they got the company to chop the head off that you would hammer, so it was smooth, and then they would put vanes on it, rather like a dart for a dartboard, and pack them into a container, and they would be dispersed upon dropping into the airstream, and fly towards the target. And he was able to witness the effectiveness of this during a major operation, which was called Operation Dingo Zulu 1. The Rhodesian reconnaissance had identified a very, very large terrorist training camps, series of camps, satellite camps at Chimoio. And this was beyond the return helicopter range of the Rhodesian border. So they thought they were safe. And it was also co-located with a Frelimo garrison of regular troops. They reckon there was somewhere in the region, possibly 8,000 terrorists and troops in the area. And after a lot of discussion, the Rhodesians put together a plan to attack it. And normally, in military terms, an attacking force should be 3 times the size of a defense force. With the defense force being in the thousands, possibly 8,000, it would need an army much, much bigger than available to the Rhodesians. And they attacked using 185 men, believe it or not. The attack was initiated from the air, and what they did, they used a DC-8 civilian aircraft to overfly the camp during morning roll call, and this would alarm all the guys, and they'd run to their prepared anti-aircraft trenches. But then they'd say it was a civilian aircraft and come back, reassemble, and then a minute or 2 minutes later, the cameras and hunters would attack and lay waste, followed very, very shortly by parachute drop troops from Dakotas, and also sticks from helicopters of the Rhodesian Light Infantry. There was RLI paras, and also almost the whole of the Rhodesian Special Air Service involved. And they stayed there and killed a lot of terrorists. But the way they got round the range problem was they set up what they called an admin base inside in a very, very remote area of Mozambique, a feature called the Train. It was high ground, and they dropped supplies of aviation fuel, ammunition, and so on there, and they had a ground element to receive it and a security element. And then the helis flew to the admin base, refueled, and then were ready to either provide fire support or to uplift the troops, extract them. And Peter Bowyer was put in charge of the air side of the admin base. So he was intimately involved in it, and he was able to fly to Chimoio and observed the effects of the attacks with both alpha bombs and the flechette weapon. So it was quite a coup for the Rhodesians, that particular operation. But basically, they took the concept of fire force, which they developed for internal use, and they did it as a big external fire force. He worked on many other things, and the South Africans had developed a particular attack helicopter. They were in the process of developing the Ruifalk helicopter, which was a rival to what became the Apache, probably every bit as good. South Africans made some really good kit, and one of the things they made was the helmet, with the iconic helmet for the Apache, which when the operator looks, the cannons follow the look. The South Africans had their version first, and it was called Katook, which means cat's eyes, and they borrowed it in Rhodesia and was actually used operationally and got kills in Rhodesia. So that's well before the development of the Apache. Really fascinating book. He had an amazing life. He was there right at the end and was liaising with the incoming government and so on. And his work, both on the weapons and on operations, was highly significant in the Bush War. Really, really good read, very interesting, very well written too.